Guru Nation, there's a lot of things happening right now with the National Institute of Health, with the Trump administration. I do plan on writing an in-depth article on this on my investigator brochure LinkedIn newsletter. I have opinions. I am not necessarily a very political person. I do see the benefits of what the Trump administration is doing. I also see the potential risks associated with some of the moves. And it honestly remains to be seen with the NIH what's actually going to happen, because this is now a paradigm shift. So what actually happened is, and before we get into that, let me just state, I'm an entrepreneur in clinical research. I'm involved on the private side of research. I've never received a penny from a government grant. I've never done any work with the NIH. The government institutions tend to be fairly incestuous with whom they work with, and there's a lot of bureaucracy involved. And the NIH has done tremendous good for this country and for the world since its inception. The argument has been made and brought by the administration that they could be more efficient. And I guess, before this was ever a thing, I'm talking about decades ago, I would discuss academic medical research and how industry needs private sites in order to make things happen quicker, and we meaning the smaller sites, a lot more done with less. And government is good at one thing: it's getting big and getting more inefficient as its size increases. So there is some substance to what the Trump administration is pointing towards. They do have to be careful with what they're cutting exactly, and I'm going to go through some of the pros and cons and whether private industry could ever actually fill the void that looks like is going to be happening. But basically, what has been cut already as of February 10th, 2025, and this is a work in progress, but what has been cut is the overhead. So the adjustment plans to cap the reimbursement for these indirect costs, and what these indirect costs are, anything associated with research grants that are indirect costs, such as laboratory space, equipment, utilities, and administrative support. So the Trump administration plans to cap the reimbursement for these indirect costs at 15%, a reduction from the current average of approximately 27 to 28%. This policy aims to save the government an estimated $4 billion annually. So again, they're cutting things like laboratory space, equipment, utilities, and administrative support from 28% to 15%. Is going to be their maximum cap for reimbursement for these indirect costs. So they're not actually cutting the innovation. They're just going to be the NIH is going to be forced to innovate. Of course, critics are arguing that, this could severely impact the infrastructure supporting medical research, potentially leading to layoffs, which has already actually happened. If you follow people in the industry on LinkedIn, AMCs laying people off, academic medical centers or AMCs. A lot of these institutions receive NIH grants and they kind of work symbiotically. There are states, 22 Democratic-led states have filed lawsuits challenging this decision, asserting that the agency is exceeding its authority and violating federal law by implementing these cuts. But it remains to be seen, can private industry fill the void? Should private industry fill the void? It's tough to ask an entrepreneur this, which is me, and me to not have an optimistic view on what private industry can do and have a somewhat pessimistic outlook on what government agencies actually do. And I admit that bias going into this. That doesn't mean I don't feel bad for the people that are going to be losing their jobs, but I think it's in our best interest to improve efficiency at the NIH, especially because it's essential basic research. The NIH supports early stage high risk research. that private companies won't fund due to uncertain profitability. So coming out with a new drug is like going to the casino every day for 10 years, betting, I think Darshan said like $1 million a day, over and over and over and over again for 10 years, ultimately hoping that the drug gets approved and then it sells well. Like, that is literally the game that private drug companies do. And there's more associated with the NIH. There's more value than just like the direct value that we're discussing, like the early stage high risk research. A lot of the innovation actually does happen at the NIH, and then it gets sold to private industry through tech transfer offices at academic medical centers. So now the question actually becomes, well, where does this early stage innovation actually occur? Like, where are these early molecules going to be discovered? And I don't know if private industry, like, it's already risky enough to be a biotech company. I don't know if the FDA is going to have to create more incentive for the drug companies to take more risk. I know they have done that with the 505 pathways, I think, where they take a pre-approved drug that's generic, like ibuprofen, and then repurpose it in a different formulation for some different kind of condition. I believe these are the 505B pathways. Robert Goldman knows for sure, but I've actually invested in some of these companies, and I'm invested in another one right now. They're doing this with epinephrine. It's Aquestive Therapeutics. So epinephrine's already been studied. You don't need to do the phase 1 studies on epinephrine. You can go directly to, in this case, what they're doing is for anaphylactic shock. So you can go straight to those phase 2 and 3 studies and bypass some of the earlier phase work. The FDA implemented that in the mid-1980s, I believe, in order to foster more innovation. So I think there's going to have to be some regulatory efforts into incentivizing private industry to pick up some of the slack. But because, again, the NIH supports this, a lot of times the NIH, through grants, they just research things for the sake of researching, like for exploration. And there's going to be a lot of these scientists laid off. The NIH grants support universities, medical schools, and hospitals, ensuring a steady pipeline of scientists, researchers, and doctors. So I think this is the first wave of what's going to happen. The next wave is going to be regulatory change of some sort, at least I hope, in order to incentivize biotechs to take on more risk. And whether that's extended patent approval or easier pathways to get to market, like the 505B2 pathway, I believe. Something similar to that. Government research often leads to private sector innovation. This is what I discussed. Many biotech and pharma breakthroughs, like the most popular one recently is Moderna's COVID-19 vaccine, started as NIH-funded projects. So the cuts could slow the next wave of biotech innovation before it reaches private investors, unless, of course, the government finds a way to incentivize private industry, which this administration has shown every sign that it will try to work with industry. So hopefully these job cuts are temporary, and hopefully a good amount of them get reabsorbed back into private industry space. The argument is that the bureaucracy and inefficiency of the NIH spending has been criticized for years. Slow approval processes and a lot of administrative waste. I think even the biggest proponents of the NIH would not disagree with a fair amount of administrative waste compared to private industry, whether it's sites or biotechs. There is more waste at the NIH and more fat that can be cut. Indirect costs account for 27 to 28% of the research funding versus Trump's proposed 15%, raising concerns about overhead rather than the actual research itself. So the early stage stuff is what worries me the most, because without some kind of regulatory clarity as to how this research is going to have to come up, from private industry now, which is risky in nature. It's going to be 10 times riskier now. We're going to have to figure out ways to incentivize these biotechs. And then another criticism of the NIH has been that the funding has political bias. Government funding decisions are subject to political influence. Research priorities shift with who's in power. And global outsourcing, I've discussed already, has already proves that private industry can step in. Big pharma and biotech firms increasingly outsource their research to CROs outside the United States, or the CROs inside the United States, who then outsource the employment outside the United States. If NIH funding is cut, the private sector might expand partnerships with CROs, startups, and venture capital to drive research. Again, I tend to skew optimistic on a lot of things, even though things may be gloomy for a lot of Guru Nation right now. I think if and when the funding is cut and when the layoffs happen, I do think there will be a percentage of the workforce that is reabsorbed into the private industry space, especially if we have regulatory reform at the innovation level somehow, or find a way to privatize innovation even more. Maybe we'll see something like a rise of public-private partnerships like DARPA-style models, but in biotech. And some areas like rare disease research or pandemic preparedness, maybe that's going to have like a public-private partnership as well. So I do think we're going to see the void filled. I think what is scaring a lot of people, myself included, is the lack of clarity as to what the plan actually is. So hopefully we get plan in place, and hopefully we get some regulatory guidance, maybe in the form of reform, and maybe it's some much needed reform. But again, the mRNA vaccine, however you feel about politics, I don't care. We started researching that through the NIH in the 1990s. Private companies focus on profitability, obviously. The NIH funds early stage high risk research. We probably need some more reform around the orphan disease, as there are private companies working on orphan disease research and getting orphan disease exclusivity, but we probably need to incentivize more of that. And then the training and infrastructure for scientists. I think these H-1B visas are part of the plan, like to import the scientists now from overseas until we reestablish our own infrastructure again. And then private sector innovation. I mean, many blockbuster drugs like Keytruda, which makes billions today, was partially developed through NIH-backed research. If the NIH loses funding, fewer new discoveries could reach private industry. This is at the drug discovery side, but the one thing I haven't mentioned yet, and it's like 14 minutes into this video, is artificial intelligence. And there's already signs that AI can play a crucial role in drug discovery and finding these promising molecules quickly. So I hope and pray that the administration understands what they're doing. The headlines are alarmist. They are making it seem like all funding will be cut. It's just these 15%. It's going from 28% to 15% of basically admin and some lab space and equipment fees. So maybe it's not a lot for private industry to fill the void, but proponents of or the critics of this are saying, well, this is maybe just the initial cuts, and if it works well and private industry can pick up the slack, maybe they'll do more cuts. And maybe the NIH funding is politically driven, and maybe that's what this new administration's worried about. Global outsourcing is going to be an issue regardless. So this is a work in progress. I can't wait to have Darshan on so we could discuss this more. Sorry for the bad lighting out here. It's nighttime and my light's not on, but I just wanted to get this out there. Stay tuned to the article as well on LinkedIn, and let me know your thoughts on this. Again, I'm an optimist. I know it sucks for the people that are working in those jobs now, but you know what? The private industry is not all that much better right now at the CRO side either. There's layoffs, and part of the layoffs is due to the lack of clarity around the Trump administration and the cuts they're making. But I do think that there are smart people in the administration that are thinking about these things, and you at least hope for some kind of public-private partnership. Let's see what happens, Guru Nation. Let me know what you think. Just my opinion. Bye-bye.